So welcome for this new interview. Now we are definitely getting closer to WWDC. This is going to be one of the last interviews. So this week my guest is Ellen Shapiro. Welcome, Ellen.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So Ellen, like with all the other guests before you, I'm going to ask you the same first three questions to begin. So first question is, if you had one wish, what would you wish for at WWDC 2021?
I think I would wish for the package manager extensible build tools to actually make it into to package manager for the next release of Swift. I know that they've really been concentrating hard on the actors and concurrency and stuff, but selfishly, that is one that would be an enormous help for me as someone who works on an SDK that does a lot of code generation. It's really, really difficult to do that, the setup for that right now. And getting that to a point where it could actually be integrated in the build process would be a huge, huge help, because it is a huge mess right now.
Yeah, definitely agree that SPM is very nice, but on the part where when you need to actually like execute code, there is still like a little room for progression. And
yeah, and there's a lot going on there. Like, there's definitely a lot of stuff in terms of that you need to be aware of in terms of like, okay, like obviously letting people execute arbitrary code during a build step is like, that seems terrifying. But being able to sort of say, okay, but we need to be able to have the tools like Apollo, like SwiftLint, like any kind of formatters, being able to say, okay, we want to be able to use these things and generate code and be able to have these build steps that, you really used to have to always do through Xcode. I think having them be in Swift Package Manager is much more sustainable. And I'm really excited about this proposal. I'm not completely holding my breath for this to make Swift 6, but boy, it would be nice.
Yeah, let's hope so. And so if you're watching and you're wondering what this proposal is and you want to check it out in more detail, of course, the link is in the description down below. And so we've talked about what you really would like to have announced, and maybe we could say, like, more realistically, what do you expect to be announced this year?
Definitely the actor stuff, the Swift the Swift evolution actor stuff. That's like, I don't think they could be indicating any more strongly that they're trying to get that launched at DubDub. In terms of like how many of these proposals have gone through the evolution process in the last couple of months. I think that's going to be really cool. I think there's definitely some stuff that it's going to be interesting trying to support sort of forward looking cases of that with also older operating systems. I'm hopeful that it's not going to be anything that's tied to the operating system, and it'll instead be tied to the version of Swift that you're using. Because that would be really helpful.
Yes.
But it's definitely not something that I'm going to be counting any chickens on until they actually announce it. And, I do like that they're starting to decouple some of the support for particular features. There's stuff where you can use some of these more advanced features on older versions of the operating system. There's still pieces of Swift UI that you can't use in iOS 13 that you can in iOS 14. But there's tons of stuff in Swift itself where you can use these really advanced features that makes your code much safer and much, I don't know about easier to reason about, but at least clearer to reason about. It's definitely something where, like, I do definitely see sort of the Swift bias towards like, let's make the compiler find as many bugs as we can possibly make it find, so that there are less bugs at runtime. And it's funny, I work at a place where a lot of people work with like JavaScript and TypeScript, and some of them have started working with Rust, and they're just like, well, what do you mean it doesn't compile? What do you mean? I can't even find out what's going on at runtime. It just tells me it's broken at build time. And it's definitely something where like it is an adjustment for some of those people, but like I'm really impressed at Swift really going all in on it, because I think it is something where um, there are places where it ties your hand behind your back a little bit, but generally those are the places where you kind of want it to. You're like, actually, I probably shouldn't be trying to do that.
Yeah, I really agree with you. So I'm also very excited about all the possible announcements about async await, and I'm really also like fingers crossed that it's not going to be OS dependent, because otherwise it's going to be
Yeah.
it's super nice, but we have to wait like for 2 or 3 years because we can actually like use it in a mainstream app.
Mhm.
And
And this is sort of where we're at with Combine at Apollo, is that we're still supporting iOS 12. We even had a couple of people who got cranky that we dropped iOS 11, but like, it's something where if you're supporting a version of the operating system that doesn't support this particular thing, there are some advantages to being able to add that support directly, but then there's, other just sort of like, well, how are we supposed to make this work for everything that doesn't use Combine?
yeah,
That can get real old. So yeah, it's definitely it would be really great if that was something that is not operating system specific.
yeah, like that's the case for app developers and even more for SDK developer, because you want to like minimize the impact that you have on the people who are integrating your SDK. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's definitely something where, working on an SDK rather than on an app directly, when you're working on an app directly, there's only one group of people that you have to convince to drop an older operating system, which is basically your stakeholders. When you're working on an SDK, you have to convince everyone's stakeholders that it's okay to drop an older operating system. And, it is something where, we're able to say, like, if you're still supporting iOS 9, 10, 11, you can use these older versions. Like, they're not going away. Like, they're all open source. And, you can keep doing that. You just won't get new features. Or if you drop support for iOS 11 in a particular version, like that doesn't just mean like all of the people who have your app installed on iOS 11 phone suddenly get like bricked. It just means they're not going to get more updates. And I think that was something that we saw. I know when I was at Spot Hero and we dropped, I forget which operating system it was, but it was something where like we were still getting income from that operating system well after we dropped support for it. And so it wasn't necessarily a question of like, well, are we like, are we just like giving up an amount of dollars that we're getting from people on that operating system? It's like, no, we're just not giving them new versions.
So that makes sense, yeah. And so
Yeah.
I had asked you what you would really like to see announced. And on the other hand, is there an announcement that maybe you would be particularly scared of because maybe it would break things for you, or it would like maybe compromise one of your future projects?
I think in terms of what I really want announced is the package manager extensible build tools. Like that would be a huge help for us. In terms of anything, I don't think there's really anything that scares me. Like I definitely know we're going to have our work cut out for us if any of this stuff actually comes to fruition. Particularly encoding the package manager extensible build tools, and then looking at like, okay, what can and can't we do with the new concurrency stuff. And yeah, it's gonna be interesting. But like all of the stuff that it sounds like is going to be introduced seems like it's going to be good. Like in terms of like what could they introduce that would be terrible? I don't really actually think there's that much. Like I'm not as excited about the idea of like Apple glasses as I think a lot of people seem to be. I'm just like, the thing with the Apple car seems really like weird to me, but it's definitely something where I'm sure that they will both come up with things that are way better than I expect and also way worse. It's just a question of actually seeing like, okay, what is the final implementation of all this stuff? Like this is something where it's just like, I'm sure that there's something I'm going to be ranting on Twitter about. I just don't know what it is yet.
So yeah, definitely I agree that until things have been announced and we get to actually like see the code and try it, it's very hard. Like because a very good idea can be implemented with a terrible API for the developers. Like
Yes.
I'm thinking of in-app purchases. Out top of my mind, that's the one that comes off.
Yeah, they've at least done some improvements to IAP stuff, and they made it way easier to test those in the last couple of years. Like testing that before, like a couple of years ago, was a complete nightmare. And yeah, like I think it is something where honestly, a lot of these changes are incremental, and everybody still loves to complain about code signing, but it is so much better than it was
Yes.
when I first started doing this with like iOS 5, and that was just a mess. And it's just it's something where I think I think Apple's pretty good at sort of recognizing where people are running into difficulties that affect Apple's bottom line. I think not always the most responsive when people run into difficulties that affect their own bottom line rather than Apple's. But I think if Apple is like, oh, this is going to make it much more annoying for people to give us money, they're like, oh yeah, we should probably fix that.
They are a business after all, yeah.
Yeah, they're absolutely a business. And I think I don't have anything I'm particularly terrified of. If you had asked me a few years ago before they introduced Swift, I would have been like, oh man, what if they like introduce a whole new programming language? And it's like, that actually turned out to be a great idea.
Yeah.
So like, even if it's just sort of like, oh yeah, like things are going to change. Like you can't always tell from what those changes are, especially when they're first announced. Are they going to be good in the long term, or are they going to kind of not work out well in the long term? Because there was definitely, there was a bunch of stuff that I was excited about that they were doing to try and make storyboards and stuff better, like IB designables and all that kind of stuff. And boy, that did not go anywhere. And which is really unfortunate. And I'm glad to see that like things seem to have moved over into the realm of Swift UI, and that's got much better sort of instant rendering tools. But yeah, like there's a lot of stuff that sounds cool that winds up not being that cool, and then there's a lot of stuff that sounds boring as hell and actually winds up being super helpful.
So we'll see early June what actually is getting announced. And
yep.
For my last question, I wanted to ask, so you've worked as an app developer and now you are working as an SDK developer. And I was wondering,
yes.
When you are an SDK developer, actually, does WWDC maybe feels different, or maybe are you looking for different things?
I think I'm generally looking for different things just because we're working at a little bit of a lower level. I think, for me, I'm in the process of sort of transitioning from being a full-time SDK developer to actually working more in developer relations. So sort of more coming up with examples and like other things like that. So I'm really excited to be able to like actually care about what UI stuff is getting announced for once. And it's definitely something where I do feel like, changes to like low-level networking are more interesting to people who are working on an SDK. I think it's also something where like there is a reason that I'm much more interested in what's going on with all the Swift package manager stuff than with all the actor stuff, because it much more directly affects my day-to-day work. And yeah, so it's going to be really interesting to see, but it's definitely sort of something where it's like you're still interested in all this other stuff, but the thing that I've said about programming for ages is just like, there is no way to know everything. There's just too much. And so you kind of have to pick your battles in terms of what am I going to spend my time really digging into and really trying to understand. And once you get there, I think it's going to be, I think it's a lot better.
Yeah, that's what we were saying in a previous interview, that even if you wanted to watch one session per week, I don't think you could watch all the session of a given year's WWDC in your entire year. So you have to give up something, and that's just like the way things work. Unless you're Paul.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. Even Paul right now is just chasing his dogs around Wales. So it's you know, there, and that's the thing, is that, like, you know, it's one of those things where, like, there are some people who just have a really insatiable energy and a really amazing ability to pick things up quickly. And I think it's something where I'm really happy for those people. But I think it's also one of those things where, like, trying to hold yourself up against people who are able to learn much, much, much more quickly can really be kind of depressing in the end. And I think it's something where, you know, you have to learn at your own pace. And, you know, for some people that pace is, you know, Sonic the Hedgehog running upside down in a thing. And, you know, for some people it's, you know, the little turtle walking along at the bottom of Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah. And I think it's a super good advice, you know, for viewers. Like, it's better to watch maybe half a dozen sessions, but really watch them and understand what's presented and how you can, like, use it in your work, than just try and see everything, and in the end where you just have nothing actionable because you've just, like, skimmed over the surface, and that's not that useful, actually.
I think something that's really helpful is watching, if you are on a team, watching things sort of with your team, and then having a discussion afterwards, because, like, A, it gives you an incentive to actually pay attention, and then B, honestly, like, I do feel like when there are things where I'm like, I didn't quite, what was that? Like, sometimes people are able to sort of be like, oh, this is this thing that is related to this theory that, you know, is like this esoteric thing that somebody learned about 10 years ago. And then there are some times where, you know, it's just reassuring to have people go, yeah, I didn't get that either. And,
that makes sense.
You know,
I remember a few years ago there was a session about privacy and differential privacy, and when they started, like, to put, like, all the big equations, and you are like, okay, nobody's understanding this stuff, I'm feeling better when I see that.
Yeah, it's definitely something where, like, if you're in a room watching with people, or even if you're in, like, what is it called? Like, one of the various sort of, like, here's a pixel art version of yourself, let's all watch a thing together. You know, like, just watching everybody's face go, what? Like, at the same time is pretty reassuring.
Definitely agree. Well, thanks a lot, Ellen, for your answers and for giving us your point of view. I guess we are all super excited to see what is announced in a few weeks. At least I am. I know that you are. So we'll see what is announced. And thank you all for watching.
Merci.